been a collaboration between, as I said, History Colorado and the tribes, and scientists, between archaeologists, between ethnobotanists for the last 3.5 years. And so one of the ways that we really look at that is that traditional ecological knowledge is based on experience and observation. It's based on oral traditions, oral histories, religious teachings, cultural practices that may vary between tribe or band and even individuals, and that really is that Ute understanding. And then we have Western science, technology, engineering, and math, which are also probably have greater variation, but we tend to think of as theory and interpretation and classification and methods and data. And that is our STEM understanding. But really, if we bring those together, we can come to a combined understanding of different things, of the landscape, of the cultural landscape of the Ute people, of plants, of the technology and the engineering that Ute people used to survive in this area, that might include structures, that might include beadwork, it might include sounds. And then we've kind of worked that into different outcomes that we're working on. But one of those outcomes has really been the field work that was done with Ute youth and elders and scientists that you saw a little bit of that video. And I'll share out the link to that video at the end. And that's one of 7 videos, and hopefully folks will have a chance to check out some of those other videos, but I'm going to keep moving because I want to do some fun stuff. So just a little bit about how this came about. One of History Colorado's is the Ute Indian Museum. One of History Colorado's museums is the Ute Indian Museum over in Montrose. That started out, it's on land that was originally owned by Chief Uray and his wife Chipeta. He was a chief of the Tabawatch band who was very important in signing some of the key treaties in the 1860s and 70s. And his wife Chipeta is actually today buried on that land. It was purchased by the Daughters of the American Revolution and ultimately gifted to History Colorado. There were goals to build this beautiful museum. This was kind of the design of the museum. I always like to show this. It's kind of a cool, very mid-century, very kind of almost church-like building. The building that was ultimately opened in the mid-50s was a little bit more utilitarian. And that was the original building. By the late 80s and mid-90s, that had been expanded. C.J. Bradford, who's the director there, had done a lot of work on that and really making it a centerpiece for the community, as well as Ute people returning to Montrose. But the building was really getting a little bit old, so we were able to do some expansion work. And as part of that expansion work, we entered into a lot of consultation with the 3 Ute tribes. So this was the museum that opened in 2017. A sister exhibit opened in Denver in December of 2018. So the consultation process, the 3 Ute tribes are sovereign nations and have a government-to-government relationship with the state of Colorado. That relationship has been really built through 20+ years of work on the NAGPRA Act, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And for both of those exhibits, the tribal representatives, who were really the cultural affairs officers, gave a lot of input. And that was 18 face-to-face meetings. And it was really through this process that we came up with this idea that we really wanted to explore this intersection of Ute science, Ute traditional knowledge as science, and see what could happen with that. So this is a National Science Foundation grant. I threw some slides in here. You don't need to worry about that. But we've done field work. We've built exhibits. There's going to be a traveling exhibit. We've been doing talks and lectures, one of which was to have been on March 16th and did not happen. We have our history takeout program, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that, and then dissemination through projects like this. But I'm going to just jump in because I want to kind of get going on some activities. So basically, one of the products we've developed is a classroom program that goes out to schools where kids are exploring Ute understandings, Ute knowledge as science, technology, engineering, and math. And we're going to look at 3 of the activities today. One's going to be about plants, one's going to be about Wickiups, and one is going to be about beadwork. So we'll kick it off with and actually, I'm gonna, if I switch the view, do you all get to switch view, or is that just me switching the view? No, that didn't work. No. well, whatever. Look at my tiny little box. I may have you, I'll switch out in a second, but for now, just look at my tiny little box and hopefully you'll get to see this. We're going to be looking at the plant activity and actually, no, I'm going to stop the share for a second. There we go. And do you want to, here, pin me? There we go. Can you guys, am I pinned for you? Okay, cool. All right, so one of the things we're going to look at is plant use. And youth people, as we mentioned, they were moving through different ecosystems at different times of the year, gathering food. So one of the activities we do in this classroom program is we'll have the kids look at different photographs. I'm going to stop being obnoxious and change the virtual background because I think it will mess up things. Okay, there we go. So we have the kids look at, I have these right side up and they'll be backwards, so that'll be okay. We have them look at photos of things that come from the environment. We have them look at ways that historically youth people transformed those things. This is a photo of an illustration of someone grinding berries. And then a contemporary photo from Ute Life. This is the Ute Crossing supermarket in Fort Duchesne, Utah, with some of the words written in Ute in the produce section. We have them look at those and then look at different objects and identify how those objects might match up. So we might have some models of the berries that would match up to the photo of the berry. We'll have, let's see, I've got some dried berries that they might hopefully identify and match to a drawing of someone grinding the berries. And then the kids always ask about this and, you know, something they might find in the supermarket to match to that. So that's sort of our warm-up activity we'll do with the kids to get them thinking about plants as food and how did people solve the problem of food use using their knowledge of the environment, using that science knowledge. So with this activity, what we usually do is we've got this kind of a fun thing. We'll have plates, and in this case, I've got, I have a plate where the kids are gonna match to the seasons. So you can see we've got summer, spring, winter, fall, a large plate. And then we'll have small plates with different plants on them and a little bit of information about the plant. So those are some examples, and then the kids would hopefully be matching them to the plant. But we're going to do that. I'm going to do sort of a simple virtual version of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my screen. Okay. Here we go. All right. Now, the first activity. All right. We're going to talk about this. All right. So what I want everybody to do is you should be seeing 3 plants there. And boy, I made a typo when I was throwing the slide together earlier. Gatherend. I don't know what that means. Gathered. So pick a plant, and then I want you to answer those questions. What part of the plant is used? What season is the plant gathered? And where does the plant grow? And take a second, and when you've got an idea, go ahead and go in the chat box. And oops, let me go back. Sorry. Like playing around with that. Okay, there we go. Go in the chat box and comment, like say what your plant was, what part was used, and what season, and where it grows. So I will start. So looking at those, while you're looking at those, does anybody see some connections between the 3 different plants. How about the sumac and the pinion nut? What type in what season those guys were grown? Right. So they're both fall. And where do you think you would be gathering pinyon and sumac in the fall? So yampa and sumac found in the mountains. Yeah, so I see, so you're starting to make those connections, and this is really interesting. I've done this with students, and they pretty quickly start to make the connections between the seasons and the locations. That fall would be a great time to be in the foothills. Um, Summer would say be a higher elevation. All right, I'm going to go to another slide so you can look at a different one. So take a look at these three plants and see if you see any interesting connections between maybe the parts of the plants that are being used or when they're being gathered. How many of you guys have some of these plants growing in the locations where you do programming? So again, these are different plants. Now we do this activity with 12 different plants. Does anybody think any of these are wintertime plants? Ponderosa, prickly pear. Anybody here ever eaten prickly pear cactus pads or prickly pear fruit? Give a wave if you have. Give a thumbs up. Some people, excellent. So all good plants. Yeah, nopales, and that's a great connection. Lots of kids that have eaten prickly pear may know it by its Spanish name, nopales, by its Nahuatl name, nopales. Um, oh, great! Somebody made a nopales salad for summer camp. Excellent prickly pear jam. So it's kind of fun. Boy, so has anyone ever eaten? Some folks have probably eaten amaranth, and amaranth or pigweed is pretty common. And you start to think about some of those grain plants and what goes into gathering those grain plants and thinking about the work and the effort of food gathering. So um, that's just sort of, sorry, I keep bobbing back and forth. So yeah, so that's one of the activities we do that's a little bit about plant use, and to get kids to think about the systematic knowledge that you need to have to survive by gathering different plants. You need to have knowledge of what parts of the plant are edible. You need to think about where they're growing. You need to think about when they're going to be in season for the things you need, and that you need to be in those places at the right time. So it sort of starts to indicate, I think, a deep scientific, systematic knowledge of the plants in that area, in all of the mountains, and how you would survive by gathering those plants. All right, I'm going to stop the share for a minute and go back to me. And now we're going to talk a little bit about engineering as a Ute concept. So one of the things, some folks had mentioned this, are Wickiups. Ute people lived, because they were moving around a lot, used very temporary ephemeral shelters. Wickiups were pretty common, particularly in the summertime when they're high in the mountains. They would make really small shelters out of sticks covered with branches, sometimes with buffalo hide or deer hide, because you really wouldn't need a shelter for that long. You could, you'd be moving on to somewhere else, and you could just leave those things behind. Certainly for some of the groups, things that are more similar to the Plains Indian teepee were pretty common, and you'll see examples of that. But this Ute Wickiup is pretty common, and today there are still, one of the things the archaeologists we've been working with have found about 300 different sites where there are still Ute Wickiups in Colorado. Some of them are dated to as late as like 1915. Some of them go back as they do the tree ring dating and go back as far as like 1780. So there's a real wide range. And even though they were built to just be up for a couple of hours, a couple of days, to shelter you from the rain, to put your stuff inside, they are great engineering, and so they've stood up for a long time. So one of the things that we do with kids is look at the engineering of that. So if you've got your whatever your tools are, go ahead. You may want to do this on a not slippery surface like a table. You might want to do it on the carpet, or grab something soft. I've got a towel. I'm going to put down a towel to do for this, and I will kind of do this, but I'm going to just attempt to do I'm going to try at least getting a kind of start out with a 3-part structure and see if I can get a tripod structure to stand here. Let's see if I can do it. My pen's maybe kind of slippery. Now, what I might want to make this
Is everybody seeing Liz's video?
You guys see my attempted? It might work better. These are pretty slippery. I wanted to sort of try that with these. But I'm going to do it with the actual materials we use for the program, which will be a little bit easier to see. Here, I'm going to put that up. When we do this activity, we use deconstructed tent poles with a little bit of Velcro, because it's just a little bit easier to try and do. So I'm going to get my basic tripod shelter there. Got my tripod structure. How's everybody doing? I'm gonna put on that, see if I see anybody. Yeah, nobody's daring to show me their structure. Anybody got a structure they want to show me? All right, Rose, yes. I love it. Nice. Good job, Rose. I love it.
And Liz, we had a question about up until what time period were Wickiups?
Yeah, so we assume Wickiups were being used in the long distant past, 8,000 years ago. But as I said, after Ute people were removed to the reservations in southern Colorado. Oh, all right, we've got a couple going on in southern Colorado and in Utah. There's still reason to believe that people were coming back to traditional lands in Colorado and central Colorado for years after that. There are some of the Wickiups that are in Eagle County do date to about 1910. So the archaeologists and the tribal historians really think that that is an indication that people were coming back to hunt and to gather food and to kind of maintain those connections with those places into the last century. So they were pretty recent. Certainly, there's some thought that larger teepees are a little bit more tied with horse culture, and that when Ute people started to become really experts at raising and trading horses in the 1600s, that they were able to carry houses with them a little bit more, although probably in the mountains they weren't. Probably when they were in the summertime in the mountains, they were using these ephemeral shelters. I love it. Yeah, you start to think about, I see Rose doing it with her hands, and you may say, oh, I love the way you're like kind of placing them around. Now, one of the things with actual Wickiups is they're using the branches. They're obviously not using Velcro like I did. They're going to start using branches and different things to attach them and really use those. So I'm going to pull up in a second. I'm going to come back. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's go to the next slide. So these are some photographs of different Wickiups. The color photos are recent photos taken by archaeologists of actual stick shelters that are around Colorado. And what I really love about them is you can see, and you can start to think about the different types of trees and just what kind of shelter you can make with different kinds of trees and different elevations. So, the shelters that they find at higher elevations tend to be a little bit taller and a little bit straighter, because you've got straighter aspen, you've got lodgepole pines. You've got just a little bit more of a straighter tree. And then in those kind of foothill ecosystems, they would use a lot of pinyon and juniper to make the structures. So you get these interesting kind of gnarly looking shelters that are still around. But one of the really cool trademarks of Wickiups as an engineering feature is using existing tree structures to build your structure, which is kind of a cool thing and a little bit different than the Plains teepee, where you didn't have a lot of trees around, so you weren't necessarily building it attached to a tree. But you can see in the color photos on the side, you can see both of those structures are leaning against trees. And then you get that historic photograph where you have this kind of fun teepee Wickiup hybrid, where they're really using those engineering principles of Wickiup building to build against a tree, but then covering it with canvas. In that case, that was probably traded for from the U.S. military. They were probably trading a lot of canvas at that point. So again, when we're doing this for the kids, this is kind of a fun opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the engineering principles. We talk a lot about what shapes you see. We really kind of structure that thinking about triangles and how triangles are important. And then the last activity I want to do is on beadwork. And so beadwork has always been an important feature for you people. Historically, way back when, using natural materials like porcupine quill, seeds, different material, all kinds of different materials. But then with the influx of Europeans and the Spaniards, glass beads become just a hugely important part of the tradition, and they're trading horses and trading food to get these glass beads. And that's a tradition that kind of has flourished since the 1700s until today. And there's great historical and contemporary pieces of beadwork. These are all pictures of contemporary beadwork at the Ute Indian Museum in Montrose. But what we're going to do is I'm gonna leave that picture up, but take a second and look at my little square picture if you need to. But go ahead and just take a piece of paper. And what I want you to do is start out by, we're just gonna fold it to make a grid. So fold it, we'll just kind of basically hamburger, hot dog style first. So fold it hot dog style, and then again, and then again. So hopefully by this point you've got, maybe even do it in thirds, whatever you want to do, but you want to just get a nice skinny grid. So you've got folded like that first, and it doesn't really, you're just using the folds to create your grid. And then unfold that, and then now fold it hamburger style a couple of times to create more lines. So ideally what you want to do is you may need to do that last one a third, but you're just folding it a bunch to make yourself a nice simple grid on your paper. You guys got it? All right, now what I want you to do is pick some colors of pens, and I've given you 3 natural patterns. I've given you a mountain, a butterfly, a flower, and a feather. And what I want you to do is use your grid. So imagine you're gonna fill each square of the grid with one color. I'm gonna do that right now. So I'm gonna fill each square of the grid with one color, and use your grid to make a beadwork pattern of one of those things or something else. So I'm gonna let you guys start on that, and maybe Nicole, it might just be worth the chaos to unmute everybody and folks can ask questions and we can just kind of listen to each other's voices while we draw.
Sure, let me figure out how to do that.
So one question I have is about the cultural modified trees that have been so popular in the, I don't know, in the last 10 years or so. And what information you've been able to glean from the Ute about the,
Excellent.
seems to be resistance.
That's a good question about the culturally modified trees, and I think I'll come back to that at the end. So now if people just want to kind of, I mean, maybe it's just chat, like it might be a little hard while we're kind of drawing, so we'll just kind of give everybody a second to draw.
Everybody is unmuted. If you really need to mute yourself, go for it. But I have officially unmuted everybody, and then Liz,
Okay.
tell me when you're ready to mute everybody again. We've got about 5 minutes, Liz.
All right. So I'll give everybody about, actually maybe, so, okay, so one question, why don't I do this? I'll solicit questions right now. I'm gonna come back to modified trees. Are there other questions folks have?
Are there any traditional games or anything like that that we could incorporate into our programs with students?
Excellent. So I'll come back to that games.
Yeah, I'm done with this. Sucks.
Are you aware of any good collections of traditional stories that have been compiled by elders?
Okay. Stories, games. I've got stories, games, and trees. I'll come back to those. All right. Nicole, why don't you mute everybody but me, and I'll kind of answer those questions while people keep working on their designs.
Okay, we also had a question in the chat room asking where people can find a write-up of the activities that you are sharing with us.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure it's.
The best spot.
Sorry, Liz, I muted you too.
Oh.
Now you're unmuted.
I know I'm unmuted. Okay, so these are all really good questions, and kind of good questions I had were about culturally modified trees, games, stories, and then where these activities can be found. And one of the really key things that we have learned on developing some of these activities was working really in consultation with the tribes. And one of the interesting things that you may have noticed, I was using tent poles for the Wickiup activities, not actual sticks. And that was something that came out of consultation. Was there was really a feeling of that our tribal advisors didn't really want kids playing at being mute. They didn't want them miniaturizing or kind of making any of the activities as playful or pretending to be mute people. So we made a really conscious decision in all of the activities that we do to make them a little bit more scientific and make them models of things. So that was one of the reasons we kind of pushed those things and why those materials are the way they are. So to kind of get back to the point of stories and games, I would encourage, in terms of stories, and when I get to the resource section at the end, I'll show you some videos. There's some really good videos of Ute elders telling those stories, and I would encourage everybody to kind of go to that, because I think it's really important that those stories are told by Ute people. They're not necessarily our stories to tell, they are Ute people's stories to tell. So we're even having that conversation at History Colorado as we're doing some virtual programming about whether we should be telling Ute stories in our virtual programming. So I would sort of encourage you to find those sources where you might have video of Ute people telling those stories. There are games, there are hand games that are a little bit more gambling games, and I'm not sure, with a lot of indigenous traditions, whether it's appropriate at certain ages or certain times of year. So I think they're kind of interesting to learn about. Hand games, it's a pretty common cross-cultural thing in indigenous communities that you can find out about and read up on. Similarly, with culturally modified trees, that is perhaps a good example where there has been one individual who is Southern Ute for whom that may have been part of his family's tradition, is culturally modifying ponderosa pine trees and other trees. But that has kind of gotten picked up by non-Ute people as being this big thing, and sort of, these prayer trees, and we're going to interpret them. We're going to talk about this thing. And I think a lot of Ute people are not fully on board that it's a cross-Ute tradition. And they've really asked people to not interpret that, and have formally asked both the state of Colorado and a lot of municipalities not to do that. So we really encourage people to, kind of look to the tribes for that information. These activities that I did today right now are part of our takeout program, but we are really working to get a version of this takeout program out to different places. So hopefully what I'll be doing in the next month or two in our new exciting world is kind of sending some surveys out through CAE and seeing who wants access both to these materials, maybe as the actual materials you could have, as a recipe book you could use to do that. So we absolutely want to get some of these out to folks. So in a second, I'm going to just pull up one more slide. I'm going to kind of these are some other resources that I hope people can get to. I'll like I said, we'll find a way to share this out through CAE. I'm sure this is all being recorded, and I can also post, I'm sure, the PowerPoint for everybody, so you have access to this. But if folks have their pattern they want to show up, I'd love to see those. Love to see whatever people did.
Thanks, Rose.
Oh, nice. Oh, I love it. Oh, awesome.
It does have a lot of colors, so.
I like it.
But yeah, I love yours.
Figured it'd be a good end of the day activity. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll stick around on, and she can unmute people, or people can ask me questions in the chat box, and I'm happy to answer questions as best I can.
I'm gonna switch over here for 1 second, Liz, and do my wrap, and then I'll let you keep going. So thank you guys. Thank you, Liz. That was amazing. We really appreciate, again, that you were able to adapt this session to a virtual setting. If you get a chance, I did put the link in the chat box for the evaluation. Somebody, I think Amber, asked if that could be, if it's one for the whole day or per session. We do have it set up per session, but it's really short, just a couple of questions on each. As we adapt to more of a virtual setting, it's great to know what's been working and what doesn't work for people. Thanks for sticking around to the bitter end. Hopefully I will see many of you and be able to shake hands or bump elbows or give a hug on September 13th and 14th up at Snow Mountain Ranch. I really hope that we're at a good place at that point and we can all get together. But if you have questions for Liz, I'll turn it back over to her. And then I'll let the meeting go as long as there are people still in the room. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll hear from y'all again sometime soon.
And I guess you can unmute people if you want. Anybody that wants to, stick around. I think people are leaving, but.
Sure, people can actually unmute themselves if they have something they want to, that might keep down on the background.
Perfect.
Background
yeah,
noise.
if anybody wants to ask anything or. No?
One other thing I didn't say was that we will, Liz, if you want to send me your PowerPoint,
I'll do that.
I can put it up, and there's a link on the CAEE PD Virtual PD Day website where everybody can go see the resources from today. Unfortunately, I only caught half of the recording, but that was my brain freeze at the end of the day. But we'll definitely find a way to get this out to everybody.
Liz?
Yeah.
Okay. I just would love more about, you talked about, because I've been thinking about this too, just like the stories aren't our stories to tell. And so finding video of the elders, but I think I just have a bigger question about kind of all of these things and the games and and like how, when we don't have that like expertise and knowledge and it's not our culture, like how do we go about really teaching about that in an appropriate and sensitive way?
Yeah, I think again and again when we were doing the consultation, there were things that we heard, obviously, that Ute people have lived here for thousands of years, but also that Ute people are here today. And I think there's sometimes there are things that I think that we might as educators have a bias towards teaching about, like, oh, we want to teach about games or you want to teach about stories. But I think for many Native groups, even just getting that idea across that there are Ute kids today living just like the students that we work with, some of whom are Native, I think is a really key message. So I think one of the things is sort of being open to those other messages and maybe focusing on that, that you might go into it thinking, oh, we're gonna learn about all the ways that this tree was used, but it really might end up being more of a that tree becomes really more of a conversation starter about who the Ute people are today, or who the Cheyenne and Arapaho people are today, and sort of, getting that message across. So I think consistently, that's a good resource, I would say. And in the slides, I put some resources. I actually realized I'll add another one, but the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian has a really great resource guide called Native Knowledge 360 that I think has some best practices and teaching points. And I think sort of reading through that helps a lot, to just think about, coming at it from different angles and different ways that even if you don't have that specific information you might think is the really important thing, it helps to reinforce the key ideas that are important.
Okay. What was the name of that, the Smithsonian resource again?
It's called Native Knowledge 360.
Great. Thank you.
And and actually I'm going to put up a great, there was such a good Facebook page right now that a colleague shared, that it's basically Native educators doing what everybody is doing right now, which is making these little short videos. And it's just amazing. It's like all these little videos with Native educators teaching about all kinds of things. So I'll find that and add that to the PowerPoint before I share it with Nicole.
Thank you.
And would that be also kind of the boundaries? Is there anything that really tells us what the boundaries are as far as what we should talk about and interpret about the Native people?
Yeah, I think that's a good question about what those boundaries are. I think that Native Knowledge 360 kind of gets at some of that. I think, it's there are things that I think just being sensitive to it and knowing. I would say, this key point of not having the kids play at or role play at being Indian, I think is consistently something that if you think about if I were a member of that community, would I be doing this? Would my gender be doing this? Would my age person be doing this? Would it be appropriate for me as an outsider to do this? And so like with the Ute, a really good example is the spring bear dance, which is a celebration of the spring. It kind of marks, there's a story tied to it that has to do with bears and hibernation, and the things about the music and the dance are kind of reflective of bears. But it is truly one of the most important celebrations in the Ute year, but it is also open to non-Ute people. So I've been to bear dance and danced at bear dance. However, in that way, it's cool. It's like if you go, you can potentially you can ask someone to dance. If you're a woman, you can be asked to dance if you're a man, and non-Ute people participate. But the bear dance happens during a certain season. And that season does not coincide with the school year. So I would never, you would never necessarily teach that as part of a school program, because it has a very specific place and time and things that need to be done around that. So I would never actually have the kids do the steps of a bear dance. But if you took your class to the bear dance on a field trip, you might get to bear dance. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Some of those boundaries are just interesting. It's not a hard and fast thing. But I think that's sort of asking that question of and with some of these things, if there's not a Ute person involved, kind of giving guidance and giving perspective on it, you might say, yeah, maybe not. I do think, again, where we took our lead for these activities is really kind of pushing it to kind of taking a step back and saying like, what's kind of a similar thing? What is a scientific model of that thing? And using that as a way to make it engaging and hands-on without playing it Indian. So if you wanted to, talk about the bear dance as a spring dance and then find an appropriate, have the kids create their own social dance for whatever, song for TikTok that's about spring. And it's a spring TikTok dance to whatever, song they're listening to. That's a way to make it engaging and fun and still respect what the bear dance is. Yeah, Rose.
So I'm having a little bit of a problem with this cultural sensitivity because we take all sorts of cultural things and incorporate them from other cultures and incorporate them into our society without it being disrespectful. And so I'm thinking back, for instance, of when my kids were growing up in Texas, and every year they were asked to create a diorama of one of the Indian tribes that settled the Texas area. And so they made their little, it would be the same as giving the kids sticks to make a Wickiup to signify a Ute mountain scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm finding a little bit of a difficulty of understanding that cultural boundary that says we don't want them to pretend they're Utes, so don't give them sticks, have them do it with something else. And so help me a little bit with understanding that sensitivity.
Sure, I think, I think it's an interesting question and always a little bit challenging, for many of us who are part of the dominant cultural groups and the communities in which we were raised and in which we live today. I think there's sort of a twofold history in that represents, that of course is not an idealized, the playing field is even and this is how it should be, but really what the reality in which people live. And I think for many Ute people, the representation of them that most people see is that museum diorama of miniaturized in the past, that's sort of the extinct Indian. And so I think it's both that combined with the fact that you don't see television shows with lead characters who are Native and living Native lives, that you aren't reading as much, there's not nearly as much children's literature available written by Native authors showing Native perspective of children and young adults coming of age. So it's sort of both of those things together that need to be addressed. And so I think when people are asking to have something respected, it's always worth listening to. I think certainly as educators who are advocating for the environment and for other things, I think we all kind of think about that too. So I think there's sort of this fear of like doing something wrong and that it's going to be awful and that you're going to mess up and it's all going to be over. And I don't think that's really how we look at it in doing this. I think we proceed forward and have ideas, and sometimes those ideas other folks are enthusiastic about, our tribal partners are enthusiastic about, and other times they're not. And that's also okay. That it doesn't feel, I guess I would just say I know that part of working on this is some things don't fly and that some things will fly. All right, well, I think I'm gonna wrap that up. Let me look in the chat box and see. Oh yeah, this is great. There are lots of good Lots of good comments and things like that. And hopefully when September, when we're all together, I'll get to bring this stuff and we can do this all again and kind of explore a little bit more in depth. But thanks to everybody at CAE for putting this on. Thanks to all of you guys for hanging out and chatting. And I'll get those slides to Nicole. So
Thank you
thanks.
again, Liz. It was really a fantastic session, and I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening and a wonderful weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thanks.
You guys did a great job.
Thanks for your help all day, Rose. I think we got it, but thanks again, Liz. That was really great.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you. That was awesome. I think it worked well.
Yeah. So
All right.
pretty successful first day, first attempt.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Good job. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Liz. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.